All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Red, White, and New Show with the Military Medium. Folks, I have another great guest today with me, Claude AnShin Thomas. Claude AnShin has a very interesting past, and currently what he does is so fascinating to me. He grew up in Pennsylvania, not only being a Pennsylvania kid, but also he's a Vietnam veteran. And then, guess what? He's also a monk. So, Claude, welcome to the Red, White, and New Show.
Thank you.
So, Claude AnShin, if you would for us, a little bit about, and of course, one of the reasons I reached out to Claude AnShin and his staff was, talking about, obviously, we're going to get into it, about his latest book, At Hell's Gate, Beyond PTSD. Well, and of course, you co-authored as well, Beyond PTSD, the Moral Casualties of War as well, right?
Co-author, no. What I did is I was asked to write the introduction to the book.
Okay.
So I did that. So
okay.
No, that's written by Camilo Macbica.
Okay. But I know that your book, At Hell's Gate, talking about
War to Peace, yes.
Right, and then also you go, you communicate Zen Buddhist teachings in a non-religious manner that is the direct and drawn from life with a deep-rooted sense of compassion and purpose. You're also the author of, obviously, of course, we're talking about the award-winning book, At Hell's Gate, A Soldier's Journey from War to Peace, which has been translated into several languages. But what I'm interested in is kind of starting from the beginning, growing up in Pennsylvania. We were talking about this before we went live.
Yes.
Your dad was a World War II veteran, correct? And a
correct.
teacher?
Yes, my father taught secondary school at Fort LaBeouf High School in Waterford, Pennsylvania. He taught U.S. history and driver education.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, though, he had a master's degree, I think, in biochemistry.
Oh, wow.
Never taught it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then obviously we were talking also about your mom. She cleaned homes, was a barmaid, a waitress.
Yes.
And then
she took in laundry.
Right.
Those sorts of things.
Right.
It's interesting to note that she needed to, my father needed, the family needed both incomes, because the salary that my father made teaching school was not enough really to support us.
Right.
At 20 years of teaching with a master's degree, he was maxed out at salary. He was making $10,000 a year.
Isn't that crazy? And about what time was that?
I would say that would be mid to late 60s.
Wow.
Yeah, 10,000 was still, during that period of time, it wasn't peanuts, but it wasn't really very much money.
Right. Well, and I think that still addresses, and not that we're going to get off on a caveat or a tangent, but and I still believe that teachers are not paid what they're worth, right? They put in so much of their heart and soul and their time and energy So really going back to your dad for a moment and talking about where you've really come from, a veteran background, your dad being the World War II veteran, your grandfather was a World War I veteran. And then we were talking about your great grandfather, you were told fought in the Spanish-American War.
That's correct.
So, interesting. It's, do you feel that had an influence on you making your decision going in the military? A little?
I would say that not only that, but the community I grew up in. So I grew up in a small rural farming community in Northwest Pennsylvania. The name of the town is Waterford, Pennsylvania. And I would say probably 60% or more of the men my father's age living in that community had served in the military. And so I was raised also, I was influenced by not only
Sure.
the family lineage, but the collective conscious that I lived in.
Yeah.
I was also an athlete. I was actually a 4-sport athlete, but had to dial that back to 3. And the language of competitive athletics when I grew up was military in nature. So
Right.
everything was pouring me into a funnel where going in the military was
Was
what
kind of
I was supposed to do.
right. I was just gonna say, do you believe that that was kind of expected of you? That's a normal course for most young men
Absolutely.
at that time.
Yeah, and if I may interject here,
Yes, absolutely.
when I came to Buddhist practice, which wasn't until 1990, when I came to Buddhist practice, I was given a language that made absolute sense to me. People have also often asked us, so how come Buddhists? How
Right,
come you
right,
became more ordained in the Zen Buddhist tradition?
right, right.
And I remember the language that I was given made absolute sense to me. So that we speak in terms of karma, the law of cause and effect, and what karma says that what was exists in me. So that my father exists in me, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, that's also my grandmother's. And so their lives are also transmitted, not only in terms of practically what they've done, but their emotional, psychological, spiritual
Right.
DNA is passed on to me without my awareness of it, as well as the influence from the society and culture I grew up in. So there is the karma which I inherited, which gives birth to the karma I create. Karma is very similar to the law of chaos physics. For every action, there's a consequence. We simply cannot know how it will manifest itself or to what degree. And so when I went to my first Buddhist meditation retreat in 1990, and I heard this language, it was lights. I felt seen and understood. I thought I had a frame for the first time to make sense, to put into language what I had always known to be true.
Mm, mm, yeah. Interesting you bring that up because I was going to ask when it comes to that law or the aspect of karma. I was
Mm-hmm.
going to ask because in growing up, going back to your childhood, you grew up in a very abusive home. I think we were talking about where you were thrown down a flight of stairs at one point,
Yes.
and just verbally abusive as well. Do you believe that that is a piece of you that generationally was passed to you? And if that's the case,
Mm-hmm.
if a person is past this generational karma,
Mm-hmm.
how do they release that? If they go, you know what, this has been passed to me from my mother or father or grandmother,
Yeah.
grandfather, how do I release it?
Yes. I don't look at it in terms of releasing.
Ah,
And the way I relate to this is that by my willingness to wake up to these realities, I then have an opportunity to make peace with my unpeacefulness. It's the primary abuser in my family was my mother, the physical abuser. Although in the book at Hell's Gate, I do describe an incident with my father. It was profound. It was one, but it was profound when I was about 8. For quite some time, and this I would say post-military, for quite some time, I blamed my mother and father for my circumstances.
mhm.
Now, what I will say is what my mother did to me was criminal. And what my father did to me on that one occasion was criminal. However, what I do with that then becomes my responsibility.
Mm.
So in the language that makes sense to me, I would say this is like this. I'm pointing to myself now.
Yeah.
This is like this because that was like that. And as this is, that becomes. So I have the opportunity to transform the suffering that I inherited from that inherited karma. I have an opportunity to transform that. So I can heal my mother and my father. I can heal those past generations in me. I can heal that cultural inherited karma in me. I can heal that by my willingness to stop doing the things that I was influenced to do because of the karma I inherited. So yes, I remember having this moment. I hated my mother. And I can't remember exactly when the point was, but I had this awareness. Oh my goodness, what must have happened to my mother?
Mm.
My mother never talked much to me personally about her background. I didn't know. I know she grew up an only child. Her mother was married several times. I don't know anything about those relations. I know my father's father died at a really young age. And then my father grew up having to assume adult responsibilities at quite a young age. I know that all those things have an impact. I just don't know that many specifics about their life, but I can have an idea of that through the ways in which I interacted with the world around me. My father's way of addressing, or my father's way of avoiding the real cost of his military service in war was he drank.
Mm.
He drank alcoholically. And
A very common coping mechanism, right?
yes,
Yes.
to this day.
Yeah, still today,
Yeah.
unfortunately, yes.
And because it's socially acceptable,
Right.
alcohol is rather socially acceptable.
Mm.
And the communities that he surrounded himself with, other people were doing like he was doing. It didn't seem out of the ordinary.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but it was.
Right. Well, and that's, and it's a sad truth because, I don't know how many times I've heard, I'm having, whether somebody is expressing maybe in some small way, I'm having challenges here or whatever, and saying, here, have a beer, or here, have a drink. And
Sure.
it's just, trying to push it down. Right. And trying to,
Or smoke this or take these.
right. Whatever. It's just a coping, trying to deal with the pain in some ways. So dealing with this, can we call it generational karma realization growing up and the cause and effect of your childhood? You said until around, you were having a lot of challenges until around the age of about 10, you said?
Well, the physical abuse from my mother stopped around when I was around 10, because at that age, I was already strong enough
Sure.
to I was already strong enough that she couldn't throw me around like she did.
Sure.
And I'd already I had been through enough physical abuse that I was already shut down to it. I already was numb to it. And because, and this is assumption on my part, I don't really know the truth of this, but what I have gathered is that because I didn't react when the abuse came, the abuse didn't escalate or continue.
Interesting.
And so yes, it was about 10. And then at the age of 11, my mother left. She left my father, and and then I, through a series of events, ended up living with my father.
Okay.
My mother left and went to Ohio, the west side of Cleveland, and I ended up living with my father.
Okay. So around the age of 14, you started getting into Hapkido. What and training with martial arts. What kind of drove you to that?
Um, I think what drove me to that was my sense of powerlessness in the world, because I had grown up in the environment that I grew up in.
Sure.
And I wanted to be, it was an effort to not be powerless. And what I understood is that violence made me strong. Violence was a way to deal with conflicts. Violence was a way for me to protect myself.
Right. Right.
If I'm carrying a gun, I'm safe.
Right. Right.
And so that's one of the things that drew me to martial arts. And I think the other thing that drew me to martial arts was that it was a structure, a container that held me. I felt safe. I didn't recognize that so much at the time, but I would say, yes, that was a motivating factor.
You have a really powerful quote here, and I think it segues perfectly into what we're talking about. And you said, we can't make the external world become peaceful. We can only become peace. There is so much trauma and sadness in the world, so much suffering. When we stop blaming others and begin looking deeply within ourselves, we can discover how suffering arises, how it's linked to violence, and to how to stop the seemingly endless cycles of aggression. Pretty powerful stuff.
It's
Pretty
true.
deep. It is.
I found it to be true. And I will also say that to just stop reacting in the ways in which I was conditioned and accustomed to reacting to the world around me. And I didn't realize I was reacting. I thought I was living and making conscious decisions.
Right.
When I stopped and was willing to take that, willing to turn my attention inward. Not, a lot of people will, there's certain people that will make fun of meditation, or they push it to the side. They say, it's just navel gazing and you're not doing anything.
Right.
But I tell you, sit down on that cushion and you invite that silence into your life. It is one of the most challenging and demanding experiences, demanding, I don't know, I was going to say exercise, but it's more than that. It's one of the most challenging things I've ever engaged with. To really be willing to embrace, to stop with distractions, external distractions, and then to simply embrace what began to show itself in that more still space.
You know, I in my words, I would always say that meditation is the state of not doing, but yet by doing something. So, you know, in a sense of you're undoing so many things. And for me personally, meditation has been one of the scariest, but the most relaxing things, because I've had to look at myself. And it sounds so simple, but yet it's so complex. And until you get it, or in that space, it's like, and I think that's why for some, they start getting glimpses of themselves and they close that proverbial door, right?
Well, I was afraid.
Yeah.
Because I was afraid that I was going to, first it started for me with psychotherapy. I was working with a psychiatrist, and I was reluctant to go to a psychiatrist because I was afraid that that the psychiatrist is going to validate what I already knew about myself.
Uh-huh.
Essentially,
Right.
that was that I was defective,
Mm,
that there was something fundamentally wrong with me.
right.
That I, as there was, I was I was not good.
Right.
For me to have done the things that I did and to be treated the way I was treated growing up as a child, there must be something really not okay with me. That I didn't consciously know that, but I at some, at a very profound level, that was my identity.
Mm. Do you feel that the ego itself was bruised, as far as saying, not, I can't be damaged, or, oh my God, what happens if I'm damaged?
Well, see, this brings me to an interesting topic. Ego comes up a lot in Buddhist circles. And I think people throw that word around without real identification with what it means. So generally what I tell people, or they use it as an umbrella word to cover a lot of different topics, or a
Yeah.
lot of different emotional, psychological states. And so what I usually ask them to do is I say, look, please take the word ego, write it on a piece of paper, go out into a safe space with a book, with a lighter or some matches, light that paper on fire, burn it, and don't recite that word again. And let's attempt to be more specific about what it is. To the different individuals, I deal with them
Got
differently.
it.
Be more specific about what it is you're attempting to communicate through using that word. So, but to respond to your question, without a strong sense of self, it is impossible to really begin to really take that step inward.
Mm.
It is the most demanding thing I've ever done. To just stop, sit down, and become still. And then I feel it's critically important for me to communicate that meditation, if people are doing meditation to accomplish something, to gain something, to get something, they're going to, for the most part, they will eventually be disappointed. And the root of meditation, of course, is, well, I shouldn't say of course. The root of meditation is silent sitting, as I've come to experience it and understanding it. However, meditation isn't something we do, it's a way of living. So it's about bringing that attention that we cultivate through silent sitting into everything that we do. So what I make an effort to communicate is that daily life and meditation practice aren't two things. So when I'm working with, when I'm engaged with and supporting veterans and others, I really make an effort to let them know that I am a Zen Buddhist monk. I'm fully ordained. I've lived as an ordained monk for 25 years now. But my purpose isn't to sell Buddhism. It isn't to convert people. What I'm doing is passing on some what I feel are essential practices and skills that can support people in discovering how to feel at peace with their peacefulness.
Mm-hmm.
And so this all has to do with the idea of self, which some would call ego, the idea of self,
Sure.
and how that has been formed. And of course, from my understanding, that idea of self or ego has been formed by all that we've inherited from past generations and from the customs and cultures we're a part of.
Beautifully
I went off
said.
on a bit of a tangent. I don't know if I
No.
actually responded to your
I
question.
know. No, I think you touched on it beautifully. And I was like, what a great segue into the into your early adulthood period of your life. And I wanted to use another one of your quotes, because on your website you got some really awesome quotes, profound. And it said, before we can get to a place of peace, we have to touch suffering, embrace it, and hold it. So you talked about earlier a little bit in this talk about ego and everything else. But do you feel, because we're going to get into Vietnam and your time in Vietnam and everything
Sure.
here in a minute, but do you feel like, so after like you experience combat, for example,
Yes.
and something so traumatic, something that shatters the illusion of self and puts little fractures, if you will, and gives you a deeper or maybe a glimmer of maybe the inner workings, in a sense, and maybe I'm not using the right words, but do you feel a deep traumatic emotional event in one's life can be the catapulting moment or the catapulting event that brings somebody to, you know what, Dean, I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know what else to do. And all of a sudden they run across Claude AnShin and saying, what's this guy doing? I see he's a veteran. Oh my God, it speaks to me. Kind of similar maybe. And I know we're going to go through your entire story, but, you know, do you feel like, in a sense, and maybe coming from your own story, like, you know, how you just happened to bump into it, or, you know, does that make sense?
Well, I, I agree. I don't think that it has to be a significant overriding traumatic event that brings a person or that motivates a person to the decision to wake up. I don't think it
Okay.
has to be like that.
But
It often is like that.
would it take something that traumatic, though, to, because we were talking about looking inward, and a lot of people don't like to do that initially,
Yeah.
or get kind of scared off, or whatever the word you would use. But do you think or feel that sometimes if there is a overwhelming factor, that where it's almost, I don't want to say feeling pressured, but where it's like, "Well, I don't have anything else to lose. I might as well, you know, I'm at the end of the road in my brain.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else to do. Hell with it. I'm just going to look inward. What the hell's in there?"
Yes. I think, yeah, of course I'm not going to argue with that. I think you're correct.
Okay.
Yes. Um, I just want to emphasize that it doesn't, and I'm asked this question, I'm asked this particular question, or people will say, well, look, I mean, I can understand why you came to this practice because of
Sure.
what your life was like, but my life's not like yours. And
Right.
so what I encourage people to say is they look, please don't compare your life to my life.
Right.
Everyone has their Vietnam. Everyone has their Iraq. Everyone has their Afghanistan. Everyone
Mhm.
has their Balkans. Everyone. It's important not to compare your experience to mine, but be willing to take the time to look at what are the roots of war in any particular individual. What are the roots of
Right.
war? As I would be talking to somebody or talking to a group, I would say, what are the roots of war in you?
Mm.
Now, when I do that, of course, when there's no visual,
Right.
it's hard for people to understand. That's why I say when I'm talking to an individual or talking to a group,
Right.
I will always say it's important for you to look at the roots of war in you. Don't
Yeah.
compare yourself to mine.
Yeah.
Yes, in my case, it went down similar to how you described. Although
Mm.
maybe not consciously, I didn't say,
Yeah.
look, this is it, I'm done.
Right.
I got nothing to lose, so why not?
Right.
Um, because I went to my first meditation retreat. It was a meditation retreat led by a Buddhist monk for Vietnam veterans. It was in 1990. And I went because a social worker I was in a therapy group with recommended it. And I thought she was out of her mind. I thought she
Sure.
was, there was nothing I wanted to do. It's nothing I thought would be of any use to me. I thought it smacked of religiosity, and that I had absolutely no interest in that. But I went just to appease the social worker and to protect my space there. But when I got there, and I heard when this monk came out and sat down, and when he started to talk, the language that he was using just made it was like he gave me a language to make sense out of what my life had always been. I mean, always been, since I had been a young boy. All of a sudden I went, he was saying things that I always knew to be true.
In your teachings, do you get with the Zen Buddhist teachings, do they talk about past lives? Is there a belief in that? And I guess my question is does that open the doorway to saying, was that something you were saying that's something that you've always known to be true? Is there a belief of saying, was there a past life is connected to this in a sense?
Well, in Buddhist teaching, they talk a lot about there's talk about reincarnation.
Yeah.
You see, it's more prominent in Tibetan traditions.
Yeah.
However, and some people take a literal interpretation of past lives, of reincarnation being having had lives previous to this. It's not how I ascribe to the realities of reincarnation. And when I say this is something I had always known to be true, I'm talking about my existence in this form from a young age forward.
Okay.
Now, the way I understand reincarnation is quite, we've already talked about some of that. So within me exist all past generations. So I am actually the reincarnation of all those past generations. They are in me. And there's unequivocally no way to avoid that. I can deny it, but I can't avoid it. And then I also understand reincarnation in a more subtle way. And so when I pass on what's been given to me, when I teach meditation practice, I concentrate on breath awareness. And one of the things that I say is that the very most important, the very foundation of life is one breath. And one breath is either in or out. So in and out are a cycle of breath. So the way the way it makes sense to me and the way I articulate this when I'm asked the question is that when I breathe in, it's for me, when I breathe in, it's birth. And then there is actually a space between breathing in and breathing out. We don't notice it, but when you slow down, you begin to notice it. So in the space between breathing in and breathing out is life. Then when I breathe out, it's death. Because when I breathe out, there's never a guarantee that I'm going to breathe in again. I don't take that for granted. And then when I breathe in, I'm reborn. I'm born again. And so the cycle of life, death, let's say birth, life, death, is constantly in motion through the act of breathing. So rather than look at past lives, I've had people talk to me about that, and I don't argue with them. I don't debate with them. I don't dismiss them. I've never had a conversation or an experience that made sense to me around that topic.
Okay.
I understand it. It makes sense to me in this way. So this is how I live with it.
So let's talk about your, in your words, your Vietnam. So at the age of 17, your dad goes and signs for you or signs a waiver to allow you to join the army. So you get whisked off away to Vietnam, where you start off as a crew chief and a door gunner.
Actually, Actually, I started off first as a door gunner because I went to
Oh,
Vietnam with
okay.
the military MOS.
Ah, got it.
Oh, and
And
for
so
those of you who don't know military acronyms, MOS, Military Occupational Specialty.
there you go. Well, take us through some your time in Vietnam in a synopsis. Uh, I know that you've been awarded everything from Purple Heart to Flying Crosses, but and how long did you actually serve in the military?
3 years.
Okay, so take us through a little bit of your time in Vietnam.
Well, let's see. So I was inducted in the military in Buffalo, New York.
Okay,
From Buffalo to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where I did my basic training. Then I went from Fort Dix to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where I went through my advanced infantry training. Then I went from Fort Jackson to Germany, where I went through some specialized training. And it was in Germany that I volunteered to go to Vietnam. I put in a 1049. I put in an application to transfer. And I would like to say that it was for heroic committed reasons, but the larger truth was, is I was getting into a lot of trouble with alcohol.
Mm.
And I was looking for a way to escape the cycle that I was trapped in, which was beginning to interfere with my training and my status and all of that. And so my solution was to volunteer to go to Vietnam. I went to Vietnam with an infantry MOS. And I went unattached. So I didn't go with a unit. I went as an individual with an infantry MOS. I arrived in Vietnam by military air transport. And these were civilian aircraft, what do they call it? MAC flights, military air, I don't know what the C stands for.
Yep, command, I believe. Military
there you
command,
Thank
yeah.
you. Yeah. So, but it's a civilian aircraft with civilian flight attendants but military personnel. So we arrived in Bien Hoa. We arrived at Tan Son Nhut Air Base just outside of Saigon. And then we were transferred to Bien Hoa to the 90th Replacement Battalion. So I was in the replacement battalion for 10 days. We were waiting for orders. And during that 10 days, we were doing details. I was driving a forklift in a warehouse, and we were burning pallets of chocolate bars, and because they weren't refrigerated and they were going bad, and it was just a lot of stuff we were dealing with. And on the 10th day, we would stand in formation every morning. We would count off, and I've always said publicly we counted off by fives. In truth, I don't know if that's really true. We could have counted off by threes. I just remember that on a particular day, they called my number out, and I was told, go over there. You're now going to be a door gunner with the 116th Assault Helicopter Company. Man, I was a weapons specialist. I knew about 7.62 millimeter machine guns, M60 machine guns. I knew about them and other weapons, but I had never even been close to a helicopter. And I was like, wow. And I went. We got in this helicopter, and I was like, I was looking for planes to come shoot us down. I mean, I didn't have any I didn't have any point of reference.
Right.
They were initially stationed in Phu Loy, which was just a bit northwest. I think it was northwest of Saigon. And the unit was there for about a month, and then they moved us to Cu Chi, which is 45 miles to the northwest, I believe, of Saigon. It was the base camp for the 25th Infantry Division. We did work primarily with the 25th Infantry Division. However, because we were an independent unit, part of the 1st Aviation Battalion, see, 1st Aviation Brigade, 259th Aviation Battalion. We would support units all over the country. We went wherever we were needed. The first or second day that I was there, I was asked by my crew chief. I was told by my crew chief that we would go out, put the guns on there. I was flying on a D model Bell helicopter, UH-1D. We called them slick ships. They carried troops in and out, did resupplies, did medevacs, that sort of thing. And I was told by my crew chief that we were just going to do an orientation flight. We were going to do pass runs and mail runs. We were going to take people into Saigon and we were doing that. And really, I had absolutely no idea what was going on. I had no training, no familiar, nothing. It was just like, I don't know. It was like, I felt like Alice in Wonderland or something. But I was told this was just, we got back to Fuloy. I was in the barracks. I don't know what I was waiting for. But then all of a sudden, my crew chief came in, running into the room, grabbed me, and said, "We got to go." It was already dark. And so he said, "Go to the gun shop, grab the guns, we got to go." And so I just did what he said. And when I rushed out to the flight line carrying the guns, there were 2 helicopters there, and they were hosing them down. They were hosing the blood out of them. Our unit had taken heavy casualties. A number of helicopters had been shot down. They were involved in an operation with the 25th Infantry, and they had stepped into more contact than they expected. And so my second day, I was thrown into combat. And I was terrified and didn't know how terrified I was. I didn't have the capacity to organize, to recognize that or allow that to happen.
Right.
And as I remember it, we were shot down that night. That would be number 1.
That was on your second day basically on the job.
Yeah.
And you were shot down.
Yeah, as I remember it.
Yeah, right.
Memory being what it is.
Sure. I get you, but
yeah,
that is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and I will also say that there are multiple incidences that I could point to.
Sure.
That they stay with me.
Yeah.
I've written about some of them. Some of them are described in the book at Hell's Gate. I do my best. I make a great effort to not just tell the stories.
Sure.
And to share war stories, but really say, okay, this is what happened, and this is how, looking back, I can see this is how I was affected. And going forward, I can see how those incidences then, how they affected my relationship with the world which I was a part of.
Right.
There were, I'd have to count precisely, but I have in the neighborhood of 27 air medals. Now, to get an air medal, you need to fly 25 combat hours and 25 combat missions to get one. And I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 27.
Wow.
Now, that's more than a lot, but it's not as much as others. There's others that I've met who have many more than that. Because I've met men who've done multiple tours, multiple combat tours in aviation, Army aviation. And so I want to, but
sure, and I understand that medals, right? And I understand that, especially coming from a soldier's aspects, that medals and ribbons do not define the man or woman. But at the same time, we understand what goes into accomplishing or what it takes to earn those. And when it's like, wow, I can't even imagine. Of course, we were always, for my aspect, always being a infantry soldier, is we were always very grateful for the aviation folks coming in with the birds and giving us a lift where we needed to go, or the medevacs or whatever needed to happen. So they always the yin and the yang. That would be a good a good analogy for air crew and ground forces. They're just a beautiful synergy there.
The ground forces that we moved around, they couldn't wait to get off the helicopter.
Oh, sure.
Because there's no place to hide.
Yeah.
No protection. And then I quickly became, I will say, addicted to the reality of flying and the risk associated with that. The statistics varied, but generally what I heard was that from the time a helicopter came under fire until a crew member was killed was between 7 and 18 seconds. We didn't have any place to hide. Nothing. Nowhere.
And I was
vulnerable.
Well, one of the things I was going to tell you too, Ashin, is I was like, boy, you got assigned one of the positions within the Army, especially, that had the lowest life expectancy rate, even compared to the infantry when the fighting started, right? And
Yes.
it's this like crazy, within, like you said, like, what I think the number you said, 7-8, was it 18 seconds?
Between 7 and 18 seconds.
Yeah, that is absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
But that's just testament the volume of fire and the ferocity of the enemy.
But I'll tell you, they couldn't wait to get off.
I'm
and
sure.
I did not. When I was offered the opportunity to change my military occupational specialty
right.
to aviation, I
Right.
jumped on it. I became a crew chief. That meant I was still a door gunner, but I was responsible for the maintenance of the helicopter.
Right.
So I went from an 11B to a 67N in Army nomenclature. And because yeah.
So talk about a little bit. So one of the times that you were shot down was in the Mekong Delta, correct?
Yeah, a lot of our operations were down in the Delta.
Yeah. And where you got shot down. So here you are stuck on the ground. Was it pretty quick as the time that you guys were extracted, or did you guys have to do some escape and evasion tactics to a different landing zone, or?
Generally, we stayed with the helicopter, and they got to us pretty quick. But there were a couple of occasions where it took them some time. So what we were trained to do was set up a defensive perimeter to protect the helicopter and the systems on the helicopter.
Sure.
So I never, although I have SEERS training, survival, escape, and evasion training, right. I was never put in that position.
Okay.
But defensive perimeters and under fire on the ground, yes. There's also on occasion where we were called in for a medevac, and the number of wounded were so many that the only way that they could take them all was that the gunner who was on the helicopter with me, the gunner and myself, we stayed behind. We stayed on the ground with the infantry forces while they took the wounded out, and then when they came back to pick us up.
Sure.
But we were there for I was not sure whether they were going to come back.
Let's fast forward some time, and your time in
Sure.
country comes to an end, and it's time to reintegrate back to the States.
Yeah.
In dealing with the after effects of post-war, PTSD, or what's now known as PTSD, back then maybe shell shock or other terms. But how did you deal with a lot of those challenges? How did you personally, deal with those?
Well, first I want to key in on the word reintegrate.
Sure.
There is no reintegration.
Okay.
We have to find a way to integrate. The way we are impacted by our military training and our military service shapes our relationship with the world. So how do we then integrate with society and culture outside of that norm? So for me, it's not about reintegrating; it's more about integrating. And how do I integrate? How do I integrate how I have been affected? When I first got, of course, I spent 9 months in military hospital as a result of injuries. And in military hospital, I went through a number of surgeries, and I was given narcotics for pain management. And they never stopped giving them to me.
Sure.
So when I left the military hospital and left the military, I left with two addictions: violence and narcotics. You mix those are not a good mix.
Right.
So when it came, it was impossible for me to integrate my experiences because I was attempting only to avoid them. And the way I attempted to avoid them was the way my father demonstrated for me. My father used alcohol. I used alcohol and other drugs simply to attempt to keep those things at a distance. However, what I know now to be true was that initially I took the drugs, and I consider alcohol a drug. I took the drugs, and the drugs took the drugs, and the drugs took me. So I reached a point where I was drug addicted, and so there was no chance of integration of either how to recognize how I was affected, and then really to integrate that in my own self, so that I could then I could develop a relationship with the society and culture that I was a part of.
What year did you separate from the military?
1968.
Okay, 68. And then how long, I don't really want to say found your way, but in a sense, did you find peace? Did you find any peace, or was it still an ongoing journey to find yourself again?
Well, let's say it started like this. 1983. So April the 13th, 1983, I had what I hope is my last overdose. I overdosed on barbiturates, and overdoses are simply indirect suicide attempts. In some instances, they're direct. In my case, the overdoses were coming closer and closer together. Life just didn't make any sense to me. It didn't hold any promise. I felt invisible, and just, I'll leave it at that for now.
Sure.
So something happened. I was working with a psychiatrist who, by the way, helped me to save my life, and not through medications, but by his willingness to listen to me, and really just to support me in the confusion and emotional, psychological, spiritual pain that I was in. He helped me. And so in relationship with him, I ended up going to a drug and alcohol treatment center in May of 1983. And it was there that I got significant information that my first and primary problem was my dependence on alcohol and other drugs, and that it's attuned to a disease of addiction, and that I needed to treat that. And if I treating that and stopping and staying stopped, then what I saw as the other problems in my life would begin to melt and dissolve, or I begin to work with them.
Could you summarize, or could you say that that was your first glimpse at your true self, like in that moment, and saying, I finally, for the first time, maybe where I got to see, me, like, oh my God, I didn't want to admit it, that I'm addicted to drugs or alcohol?
Well, initially, that's not why I went to the treatment center.
Right.
But about 2 weeks in, because I went to the treatment
Sure.
center initially because the world was my problem.
Okay.
Other people were my problem. They just didn't understand.
Sure.
And if they just would get their acts together and understand, I'd be okay. But
Right.
about halfway through that experience, I had that moment. Like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Now, and from that point forward, I was to continue to have those kinds of moments.
Like a aha moment?
Yeah, because without the intoxicants, without the distraction, then I was then confronted with all of the things all of the stuff of my life, the mental, spiritual, psychological realities that I had been unconsciously or consciously avoiding, or looking for external sources to satisfy. Suddenly they were all present in my life, and I was being thrust into a new paradigm that brought me to the point of understanding that the truth of these experiences are never going to go away. And so my responsibility is to acknowledge them, acknowledge how I'm affected by them, and learn how to live at peace with my peacefulness. I and others like me are not disordered. We are affected by post-traumatic stress, but we are not disordered. And so we are morally wounded.
When I read the quote about before we can get to a place of peace, we have to touch our suffering, embrace it, and hold it. Why do you feel that, in a sense, when I read that, I almost see like somebody holding a double-edged knife, a dagger, and like pulling it through their palm, and like, in a sense, like, I have to feel this pain in order to find peace. And then they, and find, it's like, darn, that hurts. And why do you feel that we have to get a place of suffering in order? It seems, interesting to me why we, in our psyche, why we have to get to that place in order to find that peace.
Your description, it was, I could identify with your description.
Okay.
that made great. That's how I've had that experience.
Sure.
But if I translate that into a metaphorical example, that's how it felt. It made sense to me.
Okay.
And how come we have to get to that place? I have no idea. I really don't know. I wish I knew. If I could discover that, and I suffer with that. I think that if I were doing this correctly, I could discover this, and then I could like fix everything.
Right.
It's a struggle for me sometimes, and because I feel so helpless in front of the press of denial.
Interesting. So you made through a series of discoveries and everything, And in 93, I think you were saying on the suggestion of a social worker, you go to this meditation.
Actually, 1990.
Oh, sorry, 1990. And so, and you have been struggling for all this time with, addictions
Yeah.
and everything else. And so take us, as you enter or open the doorway into meditation and Zen Buddhism, take us into that and how that all unfolded.
Um,
Saying, how long you got, Dean? How long's your show?
no. Just shortly. I talked about it some.
Sure.
I was, it was, so having stopped taking intoxicants, alcohol and other drugs, and staying stopped. And then that evolved into, I put down nicotine, I put down processed sugar, and I did a number of things, cleaned up my diet. And I really wanted to, I understood that my body is really a temple, and I wanted to care for that, exercising. Now, I wasn't struggling with addiction because I didn't know I was struggling, because I always thought the problem was external and that what I was doing was the solution. I didn't understand that it was the problem until I stopped and stayed stopped. And then I began to understand that what I was doing was not the solution, it was itself the problem. So the social worker suggested I go to this retreat. I thought she was crazy. I went anyway because I wanted to protect my space. In this retreat, I was invited to come to the monastery because I was very skeptical, and I came to this retreat and I saw people like hugging each other, and it was like, oh man, this is like, what did I step into here? This was like, oh, get away from me. This was like, it was too much. It was like a lot for me. And I was ready to leave, but I called. The social worker said, look, call me if you're having trouble. So I called, and I just stayed in touch with the social worker the first 2 or 3 days. And then and the retreat was 5, and I didn't leave. I just didn't leave. No matter how confused and how excruciating and how all of this felt to me at the time, I didn't run away. I stayed. And that was significant for me. At the end, in conclusion of this retreat, I went up to the monk who was facilitating it. His assistant was there, and I wanted to apologize for all of the death and destruction. Oh, by the way, the monk and his assistant were Vietnamese. I wanted to apologize to them for all of the death and destruction I was responsible for in their country, but I couldn't say it. I just said, I want to go back to Vietnam. And I thought, I don't know, it came out of my mouth. And there was something that said I needed to go back there. And they said, well, before you go back there, come to our monastery. Because if you go back there let us help you, we can help you. If you go there before you come to us, you will be exploited. They'll take advantage of your guilt. And I said, well, I would like to come, but I can't because I don't have any money. I was like unemployable. And they said, don't worry about that. Make the commitment. Let's see what happens. I made the commitment. People began to donate money to help me get a ticket. I bought a round trip ticket. I went because the monastery was in France.
Oh, okay.
So I bought the ticket. I went to France with the intention to stay a month. I stayed for 3 years.
Wow.
And it wasn't because it was comfortable or safe. There was something happening, and I'm not conscious. I wasn't like consciously aware of that, but I had made there was just something happening, something. And so I stayed with this process. Understand, this process evolved out of the conscious or unconscious decision to go to treatment. Or it goes back before that, the conscious or unconscious decision to go to therapy with a psychiatrist. because I was terrified to do that. So I just kept stepping into that which was terrifying for me, and I just things were changing. My life was things were changing in my life. My life was changing. My relationship. I just stayed with it.
Do you feel that you started getting more comfortable being uncomfortable?
That could be true. It could be true. I don't know that I recognized that at the time.
Sure,
Because
sure.
what I was going through was really not comfortable.
I'm sure. I'm
The,
sure.
the experiences that I had living in a monastery, a Vietnamese monastery, with it was small at the time. It's not so small anymore, but it was very small. That on weekends, the larger Vietnamese expatriate community would come, and it was a social gathering. And suddenly, I'd be in Vietnam, and wow, man, I was forced into, like, all these memories started exploding that I didn't even know existed, and they were visceral. So we talk about flashbacks, the reliving of an experience as if it's actually happening. And I was having those routinely, but I wasn't discouraged. I was encouraged to just keep doing what I was doing, and not to sort of not have those experiences and not get rid of them. And I think it's through this process that I discovered that the truth is these experiences are never going to go away.
Right.
And that I can learn to live at peace with my unpeacefulness. I still have those experiences from time to time, not so frequently, but I still have them from time to time. Being a Zen Buddhist monk isn't about fixing me. It's about supporting me to live in reality as I experience it, which is shaped by all of the experiences that I've had throughout my life.
You know, every time you use the word, you know, Zen Buddhist monk, right? And of course, I know obviously we have a with the podcast, we got a large veteran audience, but you know, and of course, everybody. You know, for me personally, every time I hear that is I think about the word peace comes up, right? And there was a cartoon, I think, quite a while back, and one guy was like walking around in it with a piece of paper that said happiness on it, and the other guy is like, "Oh, where did you find that? I've been looking for that all my life." And he was like, "I created it." And it was like, so it wasn't something external to him. It was always internal, no matter how clouded his mind or whatever was going on. And every time you say that, I think about regardless of what turmoils we're going through or what challenges, because obviously we also know that it's not just the soldier, it's not just the airman that goes through traumas, right? We all do. Every one of us walking this planet, and it's how we're showing up. And, you know, are we able to find the peace within the chaos, in a sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I caution people about, though, is, or what I encourage them to do, is give up their ideas of happiness. Because if we're attempting to get the world to conform to our ideas of happiness, we are only creating more suffering.
Yeah.
So if we're able to give up our ideas of happiness, sit just to sit, walk just to walk, eat just to eat, then happiness has the opportunity to show itself. And it may not look like we imagined it.
Right.
When we experience it. And it's not a fixed place. It's transient, and it's constantly changing its shape and form. But when we experience it, it is incredibly powerful.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions to you towards the end, but if you could give, and I know there's so many, but if you could give one word of advice for those that are on their journey of trying to, we'll just say, find their or create their happiness. I shouldn't say create it because it's already there, right? Saying to try to find themselves again. In a sense, what would be that if they're on that journey of seeking the happiness again? what is one thing that maybe they could start with?
Well, seeking the happiness again. Not again. I say, what I would say is, stop seeking.
Mm.
I would say, and first thing in the morning, and I pass this on routinely.
Yeah.
First thing in the morning, and I'll say this actually also to you.
Okay.
First thing in the morning when you get up, before you do anything, make your bed like you never slept in it. You doesn't have to bounce a quarter, but make it like you never slept. And then find a comfortable place to sit. Chair, side of your bed, on the floor, on the cushion if you want. Have a solid base of support. And then just sit and focus on your breath for 5 minutes. Just that, 5 minutes every morning. And then repeat that before you go to bed at night for 5 minutes. And then I would give instructions on how to concentrate on your breath. What is a good posture? I give that instruction, but just to start your day like that and end your day like that. 5 minutes, just 5.
Mm.
And just do it just to do it. Don't do it looking for, don't do it seeking peace, but do it just to do it and see what grows out of that. That's how when I'm meeting people for the first time, or
Sure.
people time with me, I invite them to that simple practice.
Very cool. Anshin, when this episode airs, it's actually going to be in 2021.
Okay.
And one of my questions to you is, what guidance or message do you have for folks as they go into the new year? Is there something that you want to impart to folks as they go in? Maybe maybe I don't want to say a good practice, but something that you want to share, or a word of wisdom as you go into the new year. Something, you know.
Wow. So I'm talking to people now as if they have already gone through this transition. You said 2021, right?
Right. When this episode airs, it'll be the second week of January of 2021, and we'll be in the new year. And of course, we're dealing with as we record this, we're the midway, we're about on today is the 21st of May.
Yeah.
And, we've been dealing with this pandemic for 3 months?
We're going to be dealing with a lot.
4. Yeah, I know. And I know so many people are triggered and challenged and dealing with it in their own ways. As we go into this new year, regardless whether it's focused on pandemic or not, what would be your message to maybe humanity or people listening to this in general?
How can we just be nice?
Mm.
What can I do to be of support to the people around me? But to do that, what am I willing to do to get to know myself more intimately?
I love that. Okay. And profound, thinking on that as well. It's, I love the looking at self before helping others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, so a lot of soldiers always continuously returning home from overseas. Unfortunately, the wars haven't stopped. What am I trying to say? The theater of war is still a productive machine, right? And the war machine is still turning in a sense. What is one thing that soldiers could do, or maybe people that are dealing with trauma? Is it going back to the same principles? Just start with, again, that same aspect of saying, hey, just stop seeking and just, do simple things without expecting, you know,
I, I, I don't think there's a simple cookie cutter response to that question.
okay.
What I would say is that people who are listening to this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
if there's anything that I can do to support you in helping you to find your way, please let me. There isn't one way. I would just encourage them to recognize that it is possible to find peace with our unpeacefulness.
Mm.
But if we hold on to I would caution them about holding on to the notion that there is something external that I can grab onto that will take away my discomfort. Drugs give the illusion of that for the time,
Right.
but then they create more discomfort on top of
Right.
that discomfort.
Right.
So I would just say, we can learn to live at peace with our unpeacefulness.
Mm-hmm.
We can. Please don't despair, or bring your despair to me.
Mm.
Let me support you in the ways in which I can. I can't take your despair away, but I can offer you some tools that can help you to live in a different relation with that despair. And over time, I can let you know that over time, that despair has less of a hold on. It will have less of a hold on us. It's true for me. I still have despair, but it has less of a hold on me. And so and that despair also informs me. It helps me to be of service. I have a responsibility to all those who have died in any war throughout space and time because I've survived. And I'm one of the fortunate ones who have survived. I didn't look at it that way in the beginning. I thought those who died were the lucky ones. But the responsibility I have is to say, look, violence is not a solution. If we want the world to be different, we need to live differently. And it begins with us. We can heal the roots of war in us. And if I can support you in that process, then let me.
Beautiful. I believe that's a beautiful segue into how, if somebody wants to come to you, if they want to reach out, if they want to check out about your book, how can they do that? How can they find you?
The simplest way right now is via the Zaltho Foundation website. That's Zaltho. So that would be www.zaltho, Zaltho. So that's Zula Alpha Lima Tango Hotel Oscar.
Oh, you still got it.
I do.
Awesome.
I still have those chops.
There you go.
Zaltho.org. And then how to get in contact with me or what's being offered will be there. In 2021, I don't actually know how this all is going to unfold right now.
Sure.
Right now, as this is being recorded at the end of May in 2020, I am offering regularly, every Sunday at 6 p.m., I regularly meet on Zoom with a group of veterans. And how to access that how veterans are accessing that is via the website I've just given.
Sure.
I'm also offering meditation online via Zoom, and how to access that is listed on the website. And in truth, I don't know that will change much in 2021.
Okay.
I think that because of the response that I have been getting now, I will continue to do that unless something else reveals itself. And if something else reveals itself, it will be on that website.
Beautiful.
Also, as you mentioned earlier, I've had the privilege to have a book published by Shambhala Publications. The title of the book is At Hell's Gate, A Soldier's Journey from War to Peace. How to access that book, you can also discover on that website. You can also go directly to Shambhala or to Amazon or to Random House, who's the distributor. They're the distributors, and let's see. Also, currently there's a documentary film airing, and the title of that documentary film is Surviving Home. I don't know how it will be shown. I don't know where it will be in 2021, but in May of 2020, it's available on Amazon Prime, and it's available through the streaming site Vimeo. If and when that changes, it will also be reflected on that website.
Sure.
And if someone were to buy the book, because I'm a Buddhist monk and not an author, I put my email address in the back of the book, so people could write to me directly. If they go to the website, the mail will get to me. It'll get to me quite quickly, but it's not my personal email address.
Sure. Well, very beautiful. My guest today is Claude AnShin Thomas. And one of the things, before we close out, I didn't even get to the part about everybody's like, Dean, did you just call him AnShin? And if you could, really quick before we close, talk about your middle name. That is your ordained name, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And so we were talking about this before we came live. What does AnShin mean?
Well, I actually have two ordained names.
Okay.
Angyo. Angyo is like a family name.
Okay.
So Anshin Angyo, the Japanese. And in Japanese, An translates into peace, Shin into heart or mind. So, and this was given to me by the person who ordained me. Now, it's also true, Japanese characters, depending on how they're used and what the context influences how they're defined, what they mean. But in this context, An, peace, Shin, heart or mind. Angyo, An, peace, Gyo, maker. So peace, heart and mind, peacemaker.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, my guest today, Claude AnShin Thomas, thank you so much for being on the Red, White, New Show. It has been a tremendous honor and a privilege to be able to chat with you today and share your message. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you for your service, but more importantly, thank you what you continually do for humanity. And we didn't even get time today to talk about your speaking and your pilgrimages all over the world. So go to their website and check it out. It's all right there. And the web is full of his info. So you just put in Claude's information and it'll pop up. There's tons of information out there on everything that he's done. So in signing off, I press my palms together and Dean, I bow to you and your listeners in gratitude for the opportunity to meet you and to engage with your listening audience. Thank you for the opportunity. And the same to you, Claude. Thank you so much. And thank you for your sacrifice. Oh, thank you.